My girlfriend called me replaceable while every part of her lifestyle still had my name on it. For 18 months, I paid her rent, Range Rover, phone, utilities, and credit cards $76,400 total, while she secretly searched for someone better. Then one chase notification arrived during my lunch and exposed what she still thought she owned. I'm 32. I work in financial data analytics at a mid-size firm. I earn well, but I don't really perform it. I drive a 2019 Toyota Camry because it gets me where I'm going, and I'd rather put the difference into my investment accounts. I live below what I make. I don't talk about money much in social settings. That last part, I found out, created a particular kind of misunderstanding. I met Qley about 18 months before any of this. She was creative, energetic, always in the middle of building something: photography, video, growing a brand online. She had genuine ambition, and she made you feel it when you were around her. Like things were possible, you know? Like her version of the future was real and happening, and you were welcome in it. We moved fast, faster than I would have if I'd been thinking about it more carefully. But at the time it felt like momentum, not recklessness. The financial piece happened the way these things tend to, one reasonable decision at a time. Her roommate bailed on their lease with 2 months left in the term. I had a 2-bedroom. Adding her made sense. Just temporary, just a bridge. Her car broke down a few months after that, not worth what it would cost to fix, and she needed something reliable for her shoots and client meetings, so I leased a Range Rover in my name because her credit was a work in progress. Her phone kept getting disconnected, so I added her line to my plan. $85 a month, problem solved. Then utilities in my name. Then a supplemental cardholder account on my Chase for her day-to-day. None of this happened in a single conversation. It accumulated. And because it accumulated gradually, it never triggered the moment where you sit down and say, okay, what are we doing here? And how long are we doing it? I didn't think of it as an arrangement. I thought of it as being a good partner. She told me once, early on, "You're so good at all the practical stuff. I'm a creative, I just think about things differently." I took that as a compliment. I'm going to come back to that line. About 3 weeks before the argument, Qley came to me with a new plan. An influencer summit in Miami. Panels, networking, brand deals, the kind of event she'd been trying to get to for a while. She'd looked into it. Flights, hotel, wardrobe for the content days, camera gear for what she'd shoot while she was there. She'd put together a rough number, around $4,500. I didn't say no. What I said was that I wanted us to sit down and have an actual conversation about our finances. Not a refusal, a conversation. I said I'd been covering a lot of ground for a while, and I thought we were at the point where we should talk about it together, as a real plan, going forward. She heard that as an attack. "You're making this about money," she said. "It is about money," I said. "That's why I'm bringing it up." She said I didn't believe in her vision. That every time she tried to grow, I found a way to pull back. That she was tired of feeling like she had to justify herself just to ask for support. I told her I'd been paying her rent, her car, her phone, and a credit card for 18 months without ever once asking her to justify anything. I said that wasn't pulling back. I said I just wanted one real conversation about where we were. She said, "Other men invest in their partners without making them beg for it." I looked at her for a moment. And then she said it. "You're replaceable, don't forget that." She walked into the bedroom and closed the door. I sat on the couch for a while. I want to be honest about that part. I wasn't cold. I wasn't immediately strategic. I was sitting in an apartment I paid for, and I was just hurt. The kind of hurt that sits in your chest and doesn't make a lot of noise. My phone was on the arm of the couch. The Chase notification from the Range Rover payment was still on the screen. I picked it up and looked at it. I didn't do anything with it that night. But I didn't put it away either. She didn't apologize. Not the next morning, not the day after that, not that week. What she did was move through the apartment in a particular kind of silence. Not hostile exactly, just waiting. Like she expected me to come to her, smooth it over, and let things go back to the way they were. She treated the argument like a weather event. Something that had passed. Something we should just start moving on from. I noticed she started removing photos from her Instagram. Not all at once, that would have been obvious. One here, one there. A picture of us from the spring. A short video from a weekend trip we'd taken in February. I didn't say anything about it. I just noticed. And I started thinking, more carefully than I had in a while, about the last 18 months. There was something she'd said about 6 months earlier When I mentioned I was adjusting some of my investment contributions to account for the added expenses, she'd said, "You just don't understand what it means to invest in yourself." At the time, I let it go. Sitting with it now, it landed differently. There was a girls' night last April. She came home 2 hours later than she'd said. I asked about it and got a loose answer: traffic. They went somewhere after. She'd forgotten to text. I said okay. There was a man she'd mentioned twice, someone from a networking event. A contact. She'd used that word. When I'd asked a follow-up question the second time, she'd pivoted, moved the conversation somewhere else. I'd filed it away and stopped thinking about it. My friend Dave had been at dinner with us a few months before any of this. Walking to the parking garage afterward, he'd said almost to himself, almost like he didn't mean to say it out loud, "She seems kind of distracted lately." I told him she was working on a lot of projects. He'd nodded and dropped it. I thought about that comment for the first time in months. I'd been doing what I think most people do in long relationships, storing things in a drawer in my head. The odd moments, the comments that didn't quite fit, the gaps in the stories. Storing them because opening the drawer meant drawing a conclusion, and I didn't want to draw that conclusion. The argument had opened the drawer. And sitting there that week, I was finally looking at everything I'd put in it. The photos coming down. The networking contact. The April night. Dave's read on her. The way she'd said other men without a moment's hesitation. The way the line had come out steady, not jagged. It wasn't a collection of unrelated moments. It was a pattern. I'd just been choosing not to see it. About a week after the argument, I was in the living room. Qley was on the couch, on her phone. She looked up at whatever she was watching, some reel. A girl showing off a Birkin bag, her boyfriend tagged in the caption. Qley looked at the screen for a moment. Then she said, almost to herself, "Some men just know how to show up for their partners." She glanced at me when she said it. Then she went back to her phone. I didn't respond. I went back to what I was reading. But I held on to that for a while, because she still hadn't apologized, not once, and this was what she was doing instead. She was applying pressure by pointing at a standard I wasn't meeting. She believed I'd feel inadequate enough to fold, that I'd connect the dots between what she'd said and what she wanted, and I'd book the Miami trip just to stop the friction. I wasn't angry. I was clear. About a week and a half after the argument, a mutual friend of ours, Marcus, texted and asked if we could grab lunch. We'd been friends for years, him and me. He showed up looking like he was carrying something he wasn't sure how to hand over. He told me, somewhere between the appetizers and the entrees, that Qley had been telling people things were really difficult with us, that she'd said, in her friend circle, that I was financially controlling, that I tracked every penny she spent, that I made her feel like a financial liability in her own relationship. He wasn't there to start something. He looked genuinely uncomfortable holding on to it. I said, "I appreciate you telling me." I asked a couple of questions just to understand who else had heard it, what the context was. He answered. Then I changed the subject, and we talked about other things for the rest of lunch. On the drive home, I sat with it. She was building something. Not a response to an argument, a preempt. She was placing the controlling label before she made her move, so that whatever happened next, the story was already in circulation. The narrative that explained her exit as liberation. The version where she was escaping someone who held her back, not someone who paid for everything she had. The irony was that the receipts already existed to disprove it. Financially controlling means restricting what someone can access. I had funded everything: rent, car, phone, utilities, a card she used without ever having to ask. I had never once said no. I understood what the narrative was for. And I started thinking about what came next. That Saturday I was home. Qley had said she was going to her friend Jess's place for the evening. I made dinner, watched something, wasn't thinking about much. Around 9, my phone lit up. Text from Dave. "You should look at this." There was a screenshot attached. An Instagram story posted about 40 minutes earlier, already deleted. Qley at some kind of event. Nice venue, the kind of place with cocktail lighting, designed to make everything look expensive. She was in a dress I hadn't seen before, and there was a man standing behind her. His hand was at the small of her back. She'd tagged the location. She had told me she was at Jess's. I looked at the timestamp, cross-referenced it with when she'd left the apartment. 3 hours unaccounted for. The venue was across town. I recognized her posture in the photo, the way she was leaning slightly toward him. The angle of her smile. I'd been on the receiving end of that smile. I saved the screenshot. I didn't text Dave back. I didn't call her. I put my phone face down on the coffee table and sat there for a little while. Then, I opened my Chase app. I'm not entirely sure why I did it in that order. I think the screenshot told me what had happened, and I needed to understand the complete shape of what it had happened inside of. I needed the full picture. I went through 18 months of transactions. Her portion of the lease came to $2,200 a month. The Range Rover lease was $1,480. Her phone on my plan, $85. Utilities I was carrying in my name, roughly $220 a month. The supplemental cardholder account her charges averaged across the months ran about $250. Restaurants, subscriptions, clothing, some things I didn't recognize and hadn't thought to ask about. 18 months. $76,400. I sat with that number for a long time. I'm not going to pretend I was calm about it. I was hurt. I was looking at a screenshot of the woman I'd been living with and supporting for a year and a half, standing in a venue she hadn't mentioned, with a man I'd never heard of, using a pose she'd retired from our relationship, and I was looking at the financial record of what had been running in the background while that was developing. But I want to be clear about what the number meant to me, because I think this is important. It wasn't rage math. I wasn't calculating damages. I was doing what I do when I need to understand something. I was looking at the actual data, and the data said something specific. She had told people I was financially controlling, that I tracked every penny, that she felt like a liability. Those were the words Marcus had relayed. Here was 18 months of Chase records showing me covering everything, without restriction, without once saying no. Those two things could not both be true. I texted Dave back. Thanks. I'm okay. Talk soon. Closed the app. Didn't sleep much. But when I woke up the next morning, I knew what I was going to do. Monday morning, I made coffee and sat at my kitchen table before I left for work. I made 3 calls. The first was to Linda, the property manager for my building. I asked her what the process was for removing a secondary tenant and choosing not to renew the lease at the end of the term. She walked me through it. 30-day written notice, standard paperwork, nothing complicated. I told her I wanted to start that process. The second call was to the Range Rover dealership. I asked about early lease return. There was a fee attached, manageable, and I scheduled the date. The third call was to Chase. I removed Qley as an additional cardholder on my account. 40 minutes, 3 calls. Same tone I use when I'm reviewing any account. Then I drove to work. That evening, I sent Qley a message. I kept it short and in writing on purpose. I'll be restructuring my financial arrangements over the next 30 days. The lease will not be renewed. She replied quickly. What does that mean? I wrote back. It means what it says. She sent a few more messages after that. I read them. I didn't answer. I want to say something about where I was emotionally here, because I think it matters. I wasn't being cold to punish her. I'd spent that whole week sitting with the screenshot and the bank records and 18 months of things I'd filed away, and I had nothing left to negotiate. Not because I was done grieving, I wasn't, but because I understood that every conversation we could have would be about her managing my response, not about anything real. I also want to be clear about the actual mechanics. Every item I ended was in my name. The lease was mine. The car loan was mine. The bank account was mine. The cardholder account was mine. I wasn't removing anything from a shared life. I was stopping the outflow from mine. I wasn't ending things out of spite. I was closing an account that no longer made any sense to keep open. The next 2 weeks were about what I'd expected. Qley ran through approaches the way someone does when they're trying different keys on a lock. The first wave of texts was soft. Can we talk? I've been thinking. I know I said something really unfair. She never specified what the unfair thing was. She was leaving herself room to retreat from any direction depending on how I responded. When I didn't respond, the tone shifted. You're doing this out of spite. You're punishing me for having one bad moment. I have given just as much to this relationship as you have. I read every message. I didn't answer any of them. She came by the apartment one evening. She still had a key, and the lease was running out, so there wasn't much point changing the locks at that stage. She was warm when I opened the door, herself, in the way that used to work on me. She said she'd made a mistake, that she'd been stressed and said something awful and she knew it. I asked which mistake she meant. She said she'd been unfair during the argument. She didn't mention the Instagram story. Didn't mention the venue, the man in the photo, the story she'd told Marcus and her circle about me being controlling. I said I needed the apartment clear by end of month. She called 3 times in one evening about 5 days after that. I picked up the third call. I let her start. I listened for about 30 seconds and then I said, I need the apartment by the end of the month. You have my number if there's a logistics question. And I ended the call. Dave told me a few days later that she'd posted something on her story. Vague language, something about people who only know how to control, not connect. He mentioned it in case it mattered to me. I told him thanks and left it there. She was still working the narrative. That was fine. The narrative had an answer coming that I hadn't arranged and didn't need to. A Tuesday, maybe 3 weeks after those 3 Monday morning calls. I was at my desk, lunch from home, a sandwich I'd put together that morning. My phone buzzed. Chase notification. Transaction declined. SDK Steakhouse. $380. I read it twice. SDK Steakhouse was where I'd taken her for her birthday the year before. We'd done the full thing, 4 courses, the decent wine list, the whole evening. She'd loved it. I remembered that clearly. The card she'd tried to use was the supplemental cardholder account I'd closed 5 weeks earlier. She still had the physical card in her wallet. She'd gone back to SDK Steakhouse with whoever she was with and run that card without checking first. Without considering that anything might have changed. That was the assumption she'd been operating on the whole time. That everything was still running. That supply was still available. That the account was open because the account had always been open. It wasn't. I took a screenshot of the notification and sent it to Dave. No message at all. He replied in about 2 minutes. She seriously went back there? I finished my sandwich. Went back to work. 3 days after that, I walked out of my building at around 6:15. She was on the sidewalk. I saw her before she noticed me. She'd been there long enough that she had the posture of someone who has been waiting and going over what they're going to say. She said, "I need to talk to you." I stopped. I waited. She started with the security deposit. Something about not having a stable place to stay for a couple of weekends. She was building up to a request. I could hear it in the structure of what she was saying, the way she kept softening the approach before landing on the ask. I let her finish. Then I said, quietly, "I think you should reach out to whoever you were with at the Meridian that Saturday." That was the name on the location tag she'd used before she deleted the story. She went very still. I said, "Take care of yourself, Kayla." I walked to my car. She said my name once. I didn't turn around. I called Dave from the parking structure, and I told him the whole thing while I drove home. Linda confirmed the apartment was cleared on day 29. I did a walkthrough the next morning. Everything was in order. I signed the paperwork, handed it back, and that was done. The Range Rover had gone back to the dealership the week before. There was an early return fee. I paid it and didn't think about it much. Afterward, it was a cost of closing something cleanly, and clean was worth it. What I did think about was the monthly number. With the lease off my books, the car gone, her phone removed from my plan, utilities back in order, and that cardholder account closed, I was clearing $4,235 a month that I hadn't been seeing. The morning after I finished the apartment walkthrough, I moved the first month's worth into my investment account. Not a statement, not a gesture. Just what you do with money you're not spending anymore. Dave texted me about a week after the sidewalk. Said Kayla's Instagram had turned into what he called sad girl era quotes about growth. Posts about people who can't handle strong women, the kind of content that's performing an emotion for an audience. He sent me a screenshot of one of them, I think because he thought I'd find it funny in a grim way. I didn't look at her profile directly. I had no interest in tracking the narrative she was building for her remaining audience. The people in my life who mattered, Dave, Marcus, Linda, had enough of the real version to form their own conclusions. Marcus reached out on his own about 2 weeks after the sidewalk. He said he'd been thinking about what I'd mentioned at lunch that I hadn't said no. Not once. In 18 months. He said he'd been noticing things he hadn't noticed before. He didn't say what things. He didn't have to. I thanked him for reaching out, and we moved on. The false narrative doesn't need a public correction when the receipts already exist. The account is closed. The card declines. She's out there explaining herself to people who are quietly doing their own math. That's sufficient. About a month later, I started seeing someone. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this. It's not the point of the story. She works in project management. She splits the check without a second thought. And on our third date, she looked at me across the table and asked, out of nowhere, "Are you actually doing okay? Like, genuinely?" Nobody had asked me that in a long time. I said yes. I meant it. I don't carry a lot of anger toward Kayla. I think she found an arrangement that worked in her favor and stayed in it until she believed she'd found something better. That's a choice she made. I made one too. She told me I was replaceable. She was right about one thing. I did get replaced. Just not in the way she meant.